Norman Saville, the president of Finchley Filmmakers, has been a member of the club for 4 decades. In an interview at the club's headquarters in October 2015, I asked him to reflect on his experiences and his personal journey into filmmaking in the early days. Norman recalled many films made by the club which won awards and made the club a real force to be reckoned with. Some of the club's films, made on Super 8 film, are no longer around, but we are fortunate in having some archive footage and stills of a few of them. Here is the interview, which I hope you will find interesting. Norman, 4 decades is a fantastic period to be a member of one club. Could you tell me what attracted you to join the club back in the mid-1970s?
Well, I joined the FCS in 1976 when I was 35. And the reason I joined was that my father, in clearing out a loft, found an old cine camera, which he gave me. And I started experimenting with this, taking photographs of my children and so on. And I got interested in it. And so not long after I got this ancient camera, I had already thrown it away and got something new. And I started to use that instead. And the results were absolutely horrendous. Worst I've ever seen. So I asked around and I went down to the Finchley Library and there was a card pinned up on the notice board. And it said, if you want to learn how to use a cine camera, this is where you go. And it said Avenue House every Friday evening, Finchley Cine Society, come along, and so on and so forth, which I did. And what I'm actually telling you now is more or less the wording of a commentary of a film which I wrote shortly afterwards called Focus on Fogel. And it started off, this is the dream of Freddie Fogel, who dreamed of being a movie mogul. And so it went on. And this film was all about a novice who joined Finchley Cine Society and in due course achieved his dream and became an expert and won prizes and so on and so forth. And in fact, that's what inspired me. So when I went to Finchley Cine Society, David Percy was the chairman, and I met all these inspiring characters, and they taught me how to make a film properly. And I learned all sorts of new skills. And even more exciting still, my film was made on 16mm. And that's how I came to be a member of the Finchley Cine Society, and I've never looked back.
What would you say was the most enjoyable film that you got involved with at that time?
Almost immediately, there were a number of films going on. For a start, they were finishing off a film called Escape from Hotlitz, which was made in 1976. And then hardly had we finished making that, that was all about, that was a spoof film about Colditz. The next one was called The Anna Contract, which they started almost immediately after that. And simultaneously, they were making, on 8mm, that was on 16mm, they were making an 8mm film called Focus on Fogel, which I was able to participate in. And some of the shots in Focus on Fogel were on the set of The Anna Contract. It's a great shame Focus on Fogel was it was a sort of advertising film for the Cine Society. It's lost. It's now lost until somebody finds it again. And so that really took the whole of 1977, those two films, and I learnt an awful lot while we were making it. And the Anna Contract, which was a film made by, we still got it here, it was a film made by David Percy. Was an amazing film. It won lots of prizes, and the people who made it were really talented people. David Percy was the cameraman, and there were other people who were used to working 16mm from the BBC, experts on lighting, Wilf Waters and all those people. And it was just a fantastic experience making that film, and at the same time making Focus on Fogel to go with it. So at the end of about a year in the Cine Society, I'd already appeared in 2 films.
That all sounds like a really good period of time and very exciting. What would you say were the challenges the club had at that time when it was at the peak of its success in the 1970s and the early 80s?
The challenges that it had at that time were to achieve more and more and more, and it succeeded. There was one disappointment. That was another spoof film, which was it was a spoof of Hello Hello, Underground Army. It was called Underground Army, and what they tried to do was to recycle the uniforms from Escape from Hotlitz, and it didn't quite come off. But other than that, every film which they made at that time, there was the great pram race. And other films of that sort of nature, mainly comedy films. These were all comedy films, really. Anna Contract was, I wouldn't call it a comedy film, but it was an exciting film.
Where are you taking me now?
We're going to a quietest house in central London, where you'll be among friends.
Is there a strong guard?
Of course, our security is first class, and we've arranged for someone to be with you all the time.
But a lot of them were all about running around and chasing about, and Keystone Cops type of films which we were making at that time. And we were just achieving more and more and more. There was a film which they made in 1975, which was an amazing film. You could never do it today. And that was called Never Say Die. That was incredible. They actually floated a coffin under Tower Bridge. And floated the coffin all the way down from the top of the River Thames right out to sea in Southend. That was incredible how they did that. And of course this got a lot of plaudits, a lot of cups, a lot of trophies. And then I remember the 10 Best. Oh, the 10 Best competition, where David Percy got his prize presented by Joan Collins, I think it was, if I remember rightly. We all had to go to the National Theatre or National Film Theatre, I think it was, and see David Percy presented with this prize. It was for Hotlitz, I remember, and everybody came on in their costumes, and we staged a sort of happening at the back of the auditorium, and we arrested Joan Collins and took her off. And it was just amazing. Those really were the days. And of course, all these films were made in 16mm, and film stock was kindly donated by the BBC, where a number of our members worked, some specialising in editing, and some specialising in lighting, and some specialising in all sorts of other skills, photography and so on. Some worked in Alexandra Palace, and they were just amazing days.
Apart from the films you were involved in with the club, you were quite a filmmaker yourself. Travelogues were your speciality. How did you set about doing that?
First of all, the reason I started doing those was that I went to a whole evening of films by Leo Hugo. And I sat there, and those were the sort of films which really anybody could make who had a camera and went on holiday. And they were, and you have a little more time to do it, and they were not scripted, and you just had to have a bit of an eye, and you could make, if you edited it, you could make it quite a decent film. And I watched in one evening, about 10 of Leo's films. And Leo had a certain sort of Italian smartness about him, chicness about him. And this came through in his films. And they were all beautifully framed and beautifully filmed and really inspired me. In fact, after watching this whole evening of Leo's films, I found myself speaking Italian to my wife. And walking around speaking with a sort of mock Italian accent, because he was sort of talking, everything with an Italian accent and so on. And so the first film that I made was a spoof Leo film. And that was a travelogue about Muswell Hill. And Leo made a film called Devonshire Sundays. And so I made a film which I called Muswell Hill Fridays. And I put the name of the film, the name of the film company which made the film was Pasta La Vista Films. And the reason I called it Pasta La Vista Films was that Leo had a pasta factory. He was very Italian and a very good filmmaker. And so gradually I started to copy his style. And I asked him what sort of camera he had, and he had a Canon 1014E cine camera. So I got a Canon 1014E cine camera. I asked him how he did his splicing, and he explained to me how he did the splicing. And so I got the same splicer. And I started to sort of find myself sort of imitating his film, but they turned out slightly differently in that I couldn't hope to imitate his technique. So I started to inject some jokes into them, and on the whole, he didn't have many jokes, but I put lots of jokes in. And simply when I went on holiday, I took my camera and I thought to myself, what would Leo do in this situation? And I shot the same sort of thing. And Leo always used to say the most essential thing was a tripod. Oh, he swore by the tripod. So I took the tripod. And I found that made the picture very steady and so on. And I started framing. And then, of course, I had no idea when I joined the society that you could put commentary on and music. And Leo his technique also sometimes was counting sprocket holes. And I started sort of making more and more of these travelogue film. Then I called it Savile's Travels. And that's how I really got into it. Without him, I wouldn't have known how to do it. And then also I learned how to cut the film down to 10 minutes, or 15 at the most, and how to have a beginning, a middle and an end, how to cut on action. All these things I learned at the Cine Society, and I use them all in my films.
I'm fascinated to hear more about what you recall about the heyday of Finchley Cine Society.
The first thing I remember in those days, there was what they called the Gauge War. This was a sort of gentlemen against the players attitude. The Gauge War were those who did 16mm against those who did 8mm, specifically Super 8. And it was rather, those who did the 16 rather felt that you couldn't make a proper film on 8mm. But what FCS proved was that you could. The only thing I would say is that all the 16mm films are still in the loft here somewhere, and all the 8mm ones, I'm sorry to say, seem to have got lost. So we can't really prove it. But we had wonderful technicians. We had incredible people who could do miracles. I recall, for example, our prop maker, Bob Walker. He was a veritable magician. We made a film, 8mm, called Willpower. I was in that. I played a crooked solicitor. Wasn't at all a character part. At that time, also we had Kenneth, who was a professional actor, who had understudied Robert Morley. And he was very good on makeup. And in that film, he made me look considerably older by putting white powder on my hair. But I'm sorry to say that my appearance today is even considerably older than I appeared in that film after Kenneth had made me look older. In order to make that film, we needed some props. Specifically, we had an imitation of the statue on the top of the Old Bailey. Don't know if anybody remembers that. And Bob Walker, our prop maker, made it with the scales made of a bit of chain, a couple of bits of wood, and a couple of cake doilies, which he put on it, which he painted gold. Another thing he did in that film, which was absolutely amazing, we were so lucky to have him. Our oldest member, Edwin White, had to fall down a sort of culvert into the River Thames. And we didn't know, how to make it look as though that was happening. And Bob made a swivel chair. Poor old Edwin, who was about 95, was thrown in the swivel chair backwards many times. He didn't complain. And the culvert was made out of an orange box. And this orange box was made to look as though it was an enormous great sewer. How he did it, I don't know. It was a matter of angles and perspective. And that was the sort of expertise which we had. We also had fantastic filmmakers. We had Oscar Riesel, brilliant, been making films since he was a boy, professional films. We had, earlier than that, we had David Percy. We had sundry other experts on all sorts of things. We had Leo as the cameraman. Very good actors, people who could act as well. And Edward and Muriel, oh my goodness. Again, Edward, fantastic producer. He could produce anything, German army uniforms, rifles. I remember Joe produced an old car and he produced a Rolls. Oh, mind you, not that we're short of Rollses these days. But they were just incredible people to put things together. And they were so enthusiastic as well. And I rather feel, I may be wrong, that one of the great things which really held us together at that time, apart from the enthusiasm, was the medium, which was, of course, not video, but film. There was just something about film, and this rather sort of simple cameras, which some of which were clockwork and some of which plugged in, and the risks that you took with the film and the day for night shots and the exposures, pulling focus, all these skills that we used to do, and they were great fun. And as far as the 8mm was concerned, well, it was really sort of editing, this sort of thing, backwards and forwards, cutting and splicing, China graph pencils, all that sort of counting sprocket holes. It was all, today would seem very crude. And I think really what marked the tremendous change in the whole thing was when technology came in and the computers became popular and things like social media and YouTube were invented. And since that time, everybody can indulge in all these various things which we used to regard as our little specialities. And because everybody can do it, anybody can make a film, anybody can take a decent photograph, somehow it's rather cheapened the experience. But if you're asking me about when was the best time, I would say just the period of time before video came in. That was really the heyday of the society.